They told her to step away from him or die with him. The entire Dragon Empire stood above them, silent, watching her choice. A weak human sat in chains, marked for execution at sunrise. But the maid did not move, not even when the execution blade was raised, not even when the dragon started counting down, because what no one knew was this: she was not supposed to matter, but she held the one secret that could burn the entire Dragon Empire to ashes. The highest tower of the Dragon Empire prison stood above the clouds. It was not made for comfort. It was made for breaking souls. Cold black stone walls absorbed all sound. Even footsteps felt like they were swallowed by the air. Chains hung from the ceiling like dead vines, and in the center of the cell sat a human man. He was weak, injured, barely alive. Heavy iron chains wrapped around his arms, legs, and chest. The metal was not normal. It was made with dragon-forged ore, designed to suppress movement and even block healing. Every breath he took looked painful, as if the air itself was too heavy for him. His head was lowered. Blood had dried on his face. One of his eyes was half closed, swollen from past torture. The Dragon Empire did not see him as a prisoner. They saw him as a mistake. A voice echoed from the guards outside the cell. "Useless species," one of them said with disgust. Another laughed. "Humans belong under boots, not in towers." The word human itself was spoken like it was something dirty. To them, humans were the lowest race in the galaxy, not strong like dragons, not intelligent like the Council, not worthy of mercy. Just temporary creatures that should not have existed this long. Above the prison floor, preparations were already being made. Execution. It would happen at sunrise. But inside the prison tower, something small changed that day. A young human maid arrived. She walked slowly through the iron halls, carrying cleaning tools. Her clothes were plain gray and marked with a symbol of service. Her job was simple: clean the prison floors, remove bloodstains, and never ask questions. She had been given one strict order before entering the tower: do not look at the prisoner. Do not speak to him. He is already dead. The guard who said it did not even look at her face. He treated her like she was invisible. That was normal for maids in the Dragon Empire. She lowered her head and nodded silently. "Yes, sir." Then she entered the tower. The moment she stepped inside, the air felt different. Heavy. Wrong. Like the place was holding its breath. She walked past cells filled with silent prisoners. Some were aliens. Some were beasts. Some were things she could not even recognize. But she did not stop. She was trained not to feel anything. But when she reached the final cell, she stopped. Inside was a human man. At first, she was going to obey the order. Not look, not speak. Just clean and leave. But something pulled her eyes toward him. Slowly she looked, and the moment she did, everything changed. The prison lights above flickered once. Just a single blink of light, but in a place that never failed. It was enough to feel like the world had paused. The chains on a man's wrists made a faint sound, like metal reacting to something unseen. The guards outside did not notice. They were busy laughing, talking about the execution schedule. To them, nothing had happened, but the maid noticed. Her hands tightened around the cleaning cloth. She felt something she could not explain. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Like something inside her mind had briefly woken up and then gone silent again. The man slowly lifted his head. His eyes met hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt still, too still. Then, in a very low voice, the maid whispered without thinking, "You are not supposed to be here." Her words were soft, almost lost in the sound of dripping water and distant chains. The man studied her face for a long second. Then he spoke. His voice was weak but clear. "Neither are you." That simple reply froze her, because it did not sound like confusion. It sounded like truth. For the first time, the maid felt something dangerous inside the prison tower. Not fear of guards, not fear of dragons, but fear of understanding something she was never meant to know. And deep inside the prison systems, far beneath the stone walls, something ancient recorded that moment, silently waiting for what would come next. Night in the Dragon Empire prison tower was not peaceful. It was alive with danger. Torches burned along the walls, casting long shadows that moved like living things. Guards walked in slow circles, their armor clinking softly. Every sound meant risk. Every silence meant something worse. The maid waited until the shift changed. She had learned the pattern now. When one guard left and another arrived, there was a short moment where the corridor cameras reset. Only a few seconds. But in a place like this, seconds were everything. She moved carefully through the stone halls, carrying a small cloth bag hidden under her uniform. Inside were simple things: water in a sealed metal cup, clean bandages, and a small antiseptic cloth stolen from the storage room. She knew what she was doing was forbidden. If she was caught, she would not just be punished. She would be erased from records. No name, no body, no memory. But she still went, because the human in the cell was not dying like the others. He was changing. When she reached his cell, she did not speak at first. She checked the hallway, then the ceiling cameras, then the guard distance. Only when she was sure did she quietly slide the items through the small gap at the bottom of the cell door. The man inside slowly lifted his head. His movements were still weak, but less broken than before. His breathing was steadier. His eyes were sharper. He looked at the water first, then at her. "You came back," he said softly. The maid nodded, not trusting her voice. He drank slowly, carefully, like someone who had been without water for too long, but still respected every drop. She watched him, uneasy. "You should not talk," she whispered. "If they hear you—" "They already know," he interrupted calmly. That made her pause. The man leaned back against the cold wall. Even in chains, he did not look defeated anymore. There was something strange in the way he held himself, like pain was only temporary to him. "They didn't capture me," he said. The maid frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" His eyes shifted upward, as if he could see through the stone ceiling, through the entire tower, into something far beyond. "I was sent here," he continued, "to see what they are hiding." The maid let out a small, nervous laugh. It sounded wrong even to her ears, not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. "That's not how it works," she said quickly. "No one is sent here. This is the highest security prison in the Empire. No one gets in unless they are captured." The man looked at her, and then he smiled faintly. "Exactly," he said. Before she could respond, a deep sound echoed far away, a low alarm tone. Then another. Then the entire prison system began to change tone. Red lights flashed across the corridor, sealing like blood spreading through veins. The maid froze instantly. She knew that sound. It was not a normal alert. It was a royal-level broadcast. A mechanical voice echoed through the tower, loud enough to reach every corner of the prison and beyond. "Attention, all units. New directive from the Dragon Council." The maid's heart began to beat faster. The voice continued. "Human prisoner in Tower 9 has been marked for execution at sunrise." A pause. Then the final sentence came like a blade. "Execution is mandatory. No appeal, no delay." The message repeated across every channel in the Empire. Ships, stations, towers. Everyone would hear it. The maid stepped back slowly. Her hands started shaking. "Sunrise. Execution." She looked at the man in the cell. For the first time, she truly understood what was happening. This was not a prison holding. This was not an investigation. This was not punishment. This was preparation. He was never meant to leave alive. The man watched her silently as she processed it. Then he spoke again, calm as ever. "So now you understand," he said. The maid swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry. I didn't know," she whispered. But even as she said it, memories came back. The warnings, the rules, the silence, the way everyone avoided this tower. It was never about security. It was about certainty. Her feet felt heavy as she stood there, because now she realized something even worse. She had already broken too many rules. She had spoken to him. She had helped him. She had returned multiple times. And now, with execution declared, she was no longer just a maid. She was a witness. And in the Dragon Empire, witnesses did not survive. High above the prison tower, inside a floating black fortress made of dragon steel, the Dragon Council gathered. The chamber was silent, but it was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that carried pressure. Heavy, sharp, dangerous. 9 dragon lords sat around a circular stone table. Their eyes glowed faintly in different shades of gold, red, and deep violet. Each one represented a sector of the empire. Each one had destroyed world before. At the center of the table was a holographic image of the prisoner, a human man, weak, chained, injured, but alive. One of the council members leaned forward. "This is the subject?" he asked coldly. Another replied, "Yes." "Species, human. Capture status, confirmed." A long pause followed. Then a deeper voice spoke from the head of the table. "The reports are wrong," the elder dragon said. "He is not behaving like a normal human." The image shifted. Data streams appeared. Strange readings from the prison tower. Energy fluctuations. System interference. Flickers in security grids. One of the younger council members narrowed his eyes. "He is a system threat," he said firmly. That word changed the mood in the room. System threat. Not prisoner. Not criminal. Not enemy. A threat to the structure itself. The elder dragon slowly stood. "Explain," he ordered. The analyst dragon activated projection. "Human subject shows abnormal resistance to suppression chains," he said. "Heals faster than recorded human biology. And..." He paused. "And what?" the elder asked sharply. The analyst hesitated. "He interacts with our prison systems," he said, "even while restrained." A quiet tension spread across the council. That was impossible. No chained prisoner should affect imperial systems. But the data did not lie. Another council member spoke. "This is evolution," she said. "Humans are changing faster than expected. If one of them reaches higher understanding..." She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone understood. A stronger human race would mean instability, and instability was not allowed. The elder dragon made the final decision. "Then we do not execute him as a prisoner," he said slowly. The room went still. "We erase him as a concept." No one spoke. The meaning was clear. Not just death. Deletion. Every record. Every memory. Every trace. Even the reason he existed. Back in the prison tower, the maid was not aware of the council meeting, but she felt something was wrong. The guards had changed behavior. They were no longer angry or loud. They were quiet. Too quiet. And they were watching her. 2 armored guards arrived at her station during cleaning hours. Their steps were heavy, controlled. "Come with us," one said. She froze. No reason was given, the second added. She followed silently. They took her to a small interrogation chamber below the prison levels. The walls were clean but cold. There were no windows, only a single light above. A dragon officer stood waiting. His eyes scanned her carefully. "You've been assigned to Tower 9, he said. She nodded slowly. He placed a file on the table. Inside were logs, her movement records, her access history. "You have visited the prisoner," he said. Her heart tightened, but she said nothing. He stepped closer. "Answer the question," he said sharply. "Did you help him?" The room became silent. Her mind raced. If she said yes, she would die immediately. If she lied, they already knew. So she chose neither. She stayed silent. The dragon officer stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "That is answer enough." The decision was made instantly. Subject confirmed compromised. He said into a communicator. A pause. Then the reply came from above. "Include her in execution schedule." The maid's breath stopped. She had expected punishment. But not this. Execution. Not as a worker. Not as a witness. But as part of the event. Outside, the prison structure began to change. Walls that once held prisoners were being rearranged. Platforms were rising. Viewing zones were activated. Empire broadcasts were being prepared. This was no longer a prison. It was a stage. A public execution arena. Across the Dragon Empire, notifications were sent. Citizens, soldiers, nobles, even distant colonies, all received the same message. Execution event scheduled. Tower 9 prisoner and associate human witness. A rare event, a historical correction. Everyone was invited to watch. Back in her cell, the maid stood frozen, unable to fully understand what had happened. One moment she was a cleaner. Now she was part of an execution ceremony watched by an entire empire. And deep in the tower above, the human man sat in chains, waiting. But for the first time, he was no longer alone. The prison tower had never felt this quiet. Not empty quiet, but watching quiet. Every guard had doubled their patrol. Every camera had been reset. Every system had been locked down with extreme caution. Even the air felt heavier, as if the entire Dragon Empire was holding its breath for what would happen at sunrise. Inside the highest cell, the human man sat against the cold wall. But something had changed in him. He was no longer shaking, no longer weak in spirit. The chains still held his body, but they no longer seemed to hold his mind. He looked calm, like someone who had already accepted the end and moved beyond fear. Across from him, the maid sat quietly on the floor outside the cell door. The guards had allowed her to stay nearby under strict watch. They believed she was harmless now, just another soon-to-die witness. But the truth was different. The man finally broke the silence. "If I die tomorrow," he said slowly, his voice calm but firm, "do not stay here." The maid looked up immediately. The words should have sounded like goodbye, but they didn't. They sounded like instructions. She shook her head. "No," she said softly. The man turned his eyes toward her. "You will die too if you stay," he said. The maid's hands tightened slightly, but her voice did not break. "I already decided." A long silence followed. Even the distant footsteps of guards seemed to fade away for a moment. The man studied her carefully. There was something in her voice now, something different from before. Not fear, not confusion, certainty. Finally, she took a slow breath. "I remember something," she said quietly. The man did not interrupt. The maid looked down at her hands. "I thought I was just a maid," she continued. "I thought I was assigned here by chance. But that is not true." She paused, then spoke the words that changed everything. "I was not always a maid." The air in the corridor seemed to shift. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. The maid continued. "I was part of a human recovery program. Long ago, I was taken. My memory was erased. My identity was sealed." She looked up at him. "And then I was placed here, inside the Dragon Empire system." A silence fell so deep it felt unnatural. The man leaned forward slightly. "Why would they erase your memory?" he asked. The maid shook her head slowly. "I don't know," she said, "but I think I was not the only one." She reached into her collar and pulled out a thin metal tag hidden under her uniform. It was old, faded, almost invisible. On it was a symbol, a pattern that did not belong to the Dragon Empire. The moment the man saw it, his expression changed slightly. Not fear, recognition. And then it happened. A soft mechanical sound echoed through the prison. Click. A door unlocked somewhere in the distance. Then another. Then another. The maid looked around quickly. "What is that?" she whispered. But the prison did not answer. Instead, more systems began reacting on their own. Lights flickered. Security panels glitched. Lock indicators changed without command. A guard shouted from far down the corridor. "System failure in Sector 9. Another voice responded through communication channels. "No authorization given. Check manual control." But there was no manual control. The system was acting on its own. The maid slowly stood up. "I didn't do anything," she said nervously. The man watched carefully. "No," he said quietly. "It is not you." The prison itself seemed to respond to her presence, like something inside it had recognized her. A deep hum began to rise through the walls. Not loud, but ancient, like a machine waking after a long sleep. The maid stepped back as another cell door unlocked on its own. Then another. The entire tower system began to shift. Above them, alarms started to activate, but they sounded confused, unstable, overlapping. The Dragon Empire had built this system to be perfect, but now it was breaking without reason. In the control room far above, Dragon technicians shouted in panic. Why is the central grid responding to her biometric signature? One asked. That's impossible, another replied. She is classified as a low-tier worker. But the system did not agree. Deep inside the prison network, something old had awakened. Not a virus, not an error, but a memory. The maid stood still, breathing fast. I don't understand, she whispered. The man looked at her calmly. You are not just inside the system, he said slowly. He paused. You are part of it. Her eyes widened slightly. And in that moment, far beneath the prison tower, something long forgotten fully activated for the first time in centuries, silently preparing for what sunrise would bring. Sunrise came slowly over the Dragon Empire, but it did not feel like a normal sunrise. The sky was too still, too bright, as if even nature was waiting to see what would happen. Far above the clouds, massive floating towers gathered. Thousands of them. Military ships, noble platforms, council viewing stations, all forming a wide circle around the execution arena. Below them stood the prison tower. But it was no longer a prison. It had been transformed into a public execution stage, a place where history would be corrected. Inside the central platform, two figures stood, a human man and a human maid, both surrounded by heavy dragon guards, both marked for execution. The crowd above them was massive. Dragons filled the skies and armored platforms. Their wings cast long shadows over ground. Some laughed, some whispered, some waited in cold silence. To them, this was justice. To them, this was order. To them, humans were nothing more than a forgotten mistake. A deep horn sounded across the empire. It echoed through every ship, every tower, every city. The execution had begun. On the platform, the human man stood calmly, no fear in his eyes anymore. Beside him, the maid stood still, her face pale but steady. Something inside her had already changed. She was no longer confused, no longer uncertain. She understood now that this moment was not the end. It was the beginning of truth. Above them, the Dragon Council watched from a golden floating platform. The elder dragon raised a hand. The executioner stepped forward. A massive blade, large enough to cut through armored beasts, was lifted into the air. The crowd became silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. 1 second passed. Then another. The blade began to glow faintly, gathering energy for the final strike. The man turned his head slightly toward the maid. He did not speak, but his eyes said everything. It is time. The maid closed her eyes for a brief moment, and then she stepped forward. 1 step, then another. The guards reacted immediately. Stop her, one shouted. But something strange happened. Their systems hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, enough for her to reach the center of the platform. The crowd above leaned forward, confused. Why was the maid moving? Why was she not begging? Why was she not crying? She stopped directly under the floating execution blade, and then she looked up, at the entire Dragon Empire watching her, at the council, at the soldiers, at the system itself. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through every speaker, every channel, every communication line connected to the arena, and she spoke one sentence. You built your empire on stolen human code. Silence, not normal silence. Total silence. For a moment, nothing moved. Even the execution blade stopped glowing. Then, a low sound echoed to the entire empire, not from the crowd, not from the guards, but from the system itself. A deep mechanical hum. The ground beneath the platform trembled slightly. Lights across the floating towers flickered once. Then again, in the Dragon Council chamber, alarms suddenly activated. What is happening? One council member shouted. All systems are freezing. Another responded. The elder dragon stood up immediately. Override it, he ordered. But nothing responded. Not a single command worked. Across the empire, ships stalled in midair. Weapon systems shut down. Communication lines broke into static. And then the sky changed. Slowly it turned red, not from the sun, but from something far deeper. The prison network, no, the entire imperial system, was waking up deep beneath the tower, buried inside forgotten architecture. Something ancient activated fully, a presence that had been asleep for centuries. Not a weapon, not a machine, but an intelligence. A prison AI that had not been designed to punish humans, but to preserve them. The man lifted his head slightly. For the first time, he was not just a prisoner. He was something else. The maid stood still as the system responded around her, like a living thing recognizing its origin. The execution blade above them shattered its energy field and froze completely in the air. No one could move it. No one could stop what was happening. And then the voice came, not from speakers, not from the sky, but from everywhere at once. Calm, ancient, final, identity confirmed. The Dragon Empire froze. Human protocol recognized. The council backed away in shock. Primary creators detected. The world seemed to tilt. And in that moment, the truth was revealed across every screen, every tower, every mind connected to the system. The humans were never prisoners. They were the creators. The Empire had not conquered them. It had inherited their world. And now, that inheritance was waking up.